first time, wanted to reintroduce Jyoti. So she walked us through last week preparing your environment. She's absolutely amazing. She works for Microsoft Customer Success Headquarters, as does myself. Jyoti, thank you again for joining us. I know we're going to get you at least for one more week. I'm so glad because you are, I would say, one of the foremost specialists when it comes to not only this, but a lot of the development we have around Teams and Power Platform. So thank you.
All good. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Hi, everyone.
And so I'm Jace Marino. I work for Customer Success Headquarters as well. I have been leading Microsoft Teams platform, so all things apps and integrations in Team for the past 2 years, and work together with some of our Broadcast Hub team, joined by Jess and Michelle, both from Microsoft Australia, Microsoft New Zealand, and they've got quite a few peers who have joined as well today, which is awesome to give support behind the scenes. And as always, I encourage all the Microsoft folks, or anybody for that matter, to pop off if you want to add something to the conversation as we go through. So real quick to update on our progress, we have finished week 1 office hours, which was last week. We have that recorded again. That was really getting your environment ready, getting your people ready, getting technically set up for this. Today, Jyoti's going to walk us through actually deploying the application, which is awesome because we'll have this recorded, which is going to be so valuable afterwards. And then next week, we'll start to get into actually planning your campaigns and your strategies. So I'll lead that session. And then we've got Jess and Michelle, who are going to co-own some of the sessions moving forward, which will be fantastic. So a ton of great content coming for you. And we've got some goodies that we finally get to share with you, I think, next week at the latest, which should be awesome. Just a reminder, if you're not ready to deploy, or you're watching this and you're still getting some things set up in your environment, which is understandable. We know security sometimes can take a while to get approvals. Our goal is to not leave anyone behind. That's why we're recording and taking this step by step so you can move at any pace. We've got some organizations that are actually sending their first message this week already because they jumped ahead. We have some that aren't even ready to start deploying, and that's completely fine, right? We knew that was going to be the case with so many organizations here. And so we wanted to make this as easy as possible to follow at your own pace. So we're always open to feedback if we can do that better. All right, so enough from me. Let's get into deploying the actual application today. Jyoti, did you want to take over, or did you want to actually cover any of the slides that we've got first?
Just the first one, Jace.
Hey, by the way,
and then
we're
I
getting
can.
A little bit of feedback in your mic.
Is it? Just a minute. Is it fine now?
A little bit of feedback there, but I'll pull the slide up as you're going through that.
Just give me a second.
Sure. So as Jyoti's doing that too, if you didn't see it, if you just scroll up a little bit in the chat, yesterday I posted some links if you want to follow along. I know it might be kind of tough to follow along as we go through this, which is why we wanted to record it. But again, if you've already gone through the deployment, feel free, again, please pop in questions in the chat as we go. I'm going to skip muting everybody just because it's a smaller group. So throw your questions in. We also have had quite a few chats behind the scenes as we go through this deployment to address some of the more common questions and troubleshooting that we get, having gone through a bunch of these ourselves. So Jyoti and I talked about covering those as we go through, so we'll do our best. But if we skip anything, forget it. If you have an experience you want to call out, please do.
Okay. Is it fine, Jace, now?
Oh, sounding good. Crystal clear.
Okay, great. So what I would like to do, Jace, is just go through that first slide for the week 2. And then I'll just take over. I'll share the screen.
You're waiting for me. My bad.
Okay. Great. So a very good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So a quick recap before we start with the deployment part of the Company Communicator application. So last week, as we discussed about the prerequisites on on the things like what are the things required to prepare your organization, or what are the things that are required for preparing your environment. So focusing on the second aspect that is required for deploying Company Communicator app, like what are the key things that we need for our Company Communicator app to quickly get deployed. So the first thing is Azure subscription. The reason we say Azure subscription is because Company Communicator solution is basically your web app that has been deployed on one of the Azure websites. So there are various Azure resources that gets created in terms of your solution being deployed into Azure websites. Your Azure table storage is being used for various data stores. data storage related aspects, so which we will cover in detail when we walk through the deployment part. So that's where we need Azure subscription. We need to ensure that user who would be deploying this app has at least owner level of access to deploy Company Communicator app, so owner level of access on the Azure subscription. So that is one of the prerequisites. One of the other prerequisite is to make sure that you have your list of authors ready, so that we know that these are the authors that we have to configure while deploying this app so that they can compose the message. Even if you don't have that ready, that's fine. We can put maybe your test accounts for the time being, for the pilot purpose, and later on we can always update through the configuration of the Azure app service, which I'll showcase it to you when we deploy our app. The other part is to make sure when we deploy our Azure resources is the selection of the Azure region. So we need to ensure that we select the region which is like nearest available to part where our team's data location is there, and also it has all the Azure resources available. So the key Azure resources in terms of, say, our Azure App Service, our Azure Storage, Azure Application Insights, Azure Functions, Azure Service Bus. So these are the required Azure services, and we need to select the region which has these services, and these are the pretty basic ones which would be available. So that is the one thing. And I guess I forgot about the first part. Yeah. So also when we use Azure subscription, one of the key things that to note down is, do we want to use a custom domain or not? So if we have to use the custom domain, so there is a different set of configuration that we need to do. Once our app service is being deployed, we have to associate a custom domain with that app service. So that's for the first part. That is where we would have to ensure that if it is a custom domain, so we will follow a separate route. So this is from the Azure subscription part. Coming to the second point, so this is where we would have to either download the GitHub repository. So basically the reason why we download it is we have our app packages files which we would be using at the last step to create your team's app package and upload it to your team's app store. There is also one more option wherein we can clone the GitHub repository. Now, this is completely optional. The reason when we want to clone the GitHub repository is more when we want to do further customization. So for the start, you can definitely clone it, but say it would be more useful when you go down the line of further customizing your Company Communicator app. The third part is for your Azure AD admin consent. This is because we are basically deploying our Azure Company Communicator application on Azure, and it has been authenticated by our apps that are registered within your Azure AD tenant. So these apps would need certain set of permissions, because when we see Company Communicator app, and as per the demo that we have shown earlier, we have the option to send out the messages to the specific teams, to all the users, or basically proactive even install this app for the users. And we use certain graph APIs for which these API permissions are required, which we will showcase in detail when we walk through the deployment guide. And the last part is we need access to our team's admin center, because that's where we would set up all our app policies, like your app permission policies, your app setup policies, and that's where you would be uploading your app so that it is available to all the users. So with that, let me share my screen.
Jyoti, just to call out as you're sharing too, on that Git repository for cloning, we often see a lot of customers, just to reiterate this, we touched briefly on it last week. We see a lot of customers start using Company Communicator in the out of the box experience, if you will. So no customizations early on. And then as you get a little more comfortable with it, a lot of times there's requests. One thing that we're doing, if you haven't seen, is the last section of our FAQ, which we're continuously updating, is being updated with some existing code for customizations, as well as guidance on how to add it in. So that'll be pretty awesome. And then what we're working on, hopefully we're putting a lot of pressure on engineering right now to be fully transparent, is we would like to update this page that you're looking at right now with the official version at some point, having some of these additional updates. We'll keep everybody posted as we go, but I actually think this program is going to help us with that endeavor quite a bit.
Yes. True. So say if you want to go down the route of, cloning the GitHub repository, you can fork the repository. And when you would go to the GitHub repo part, there is an option to either download the zip folder or you can directly clone the repository within your GitHub. So there, that's where your entire source code would be there. You have forked the repository and you can, customize as per your need going down the line. But coming back to say our first part in terms of say um, our company communicator resources. So for this app, as it's open source and it is published on GitHub, it has all the details starting from your deployment guide. So if you want to deploy it with your ARM template, or you would want to deploy it through PowerShell scripts, uh, details on data stores, details on the solution overview, details on the cost estimates. So a quick insight on the solution overview. I'd covered this yesterday as well, but yeah, just a brief insight about what is there for the Company Communicator app. As I've always been mentioning, that Company Communicator app is basically deployed on Azure. It's a web app that has been deployed on the Azure. So that's where your solution would be deployed on your Azure app service. And it has been with the solution that has been deployed on your app service, there are endpoints, bot endpoints that are being published, and that's why we are registering it with our Azure bot services. So we have two bots that comes with Company Communicator. There's one bot for your user and one bot for your author. So when I say this, Company Communicator solution itself has has two different apps. There is one app for the user persona and one app for the author persona. So you would see that for the user persona, you will get all your notifications, your message notifications. So that is delivered via bot, right? So that is where you have your bot messaging endpoint for your users, and there would be another bot messaging endpoint for your authors, because there is a solution, the bot application and the tab application that has been deployed on this Azure web app, and that's where we can compose our messages. So this is from the solution point of view. In terms of the data storage, we basically use Azure storage and our table storage to store all the details in terms of user data, what all users have say installed this app, teams data in terms of what all teams have installed this app, in terms of notification data. So we'll have the details about all the messages that are being composed, who are the recipients, what's the image URL, what's the button URL, whether it has been required to be delivered to all the users or to the users of particular group or to the members of particular group. So all these details are stored in the Azure storage table, and they are being then queued by your service bus queue and delivered to the recipients through our Azure functions. As of now, we have basically 5 Azure functions, but the 3 main Azure functions are wherein we first have the processing to prepare the content that we need to deliver to all the recipient. Then there is a send message function which actually delivers the message, and then we have the aggregation function to quickly check whether what has been the failure and the success rate, and there is the cleanup aspect and the export aspect as well. So this is in a nutshell about your Azure resources. Now this entire application is being authenticated by your apps that you would register within your Azure AD, and that's what would be our first step for our deployment that we'll start today. Now we'll be registering our two Azure AD application, one for user and one for author. As I've been mentioning, right, that we have two personas and we have two messaging endpoints for two bots, that is for your author bot and for your user bot, and that's where we need these two apps to be registered. Now there can be two kind of scenarios over here. One would be, say you have your Azure subscription and your Azure AD tenant of your M365 within the same, they both are same, they're not into the separate tenants. So that is one aspect wherein you create your app registration within the same Azure AD tenant. There can be a different scenario in which your Azure subscription is different and your Azure AD tenant of M365 is different. So when I say Azure AD tenant of M365, this is the tenant on which you would be uploading your Teams app packages. This is the tenant on which all your users are enabled on Teams. And that's where within that tenant, we would have to focus on Azure AD to register these apps. So any questions, guys, on that Azure AD tenant part, please let me know. Okay, so coming to this part now, this is my M365 tenant. And as the first step, I would start with creation of my app registration. So let me create my first registration, my first app that is for company, say for MS demo, company communicator user. So this is my app registration that I'm doing for my user bot. So I've provided the name as we would be using this app with our Azure bot service. We always have to go with our multi-tenant app registration so that say the accounts in any organizational directory can use this app. So once we register this app, we'll get our required details that we would have to make sure that we note it down, because this is the one that would be used when we deploy our Azure resources, because all these app details, like in terms of application ID or application secret, that is client secret, are basically used for authenticating your bot application, your tab application that is installed on your Azure web app or your Azure app service. So quickly taking a note of our client ID. This is for our company communicator user app. So I'm just taking a note within my OneNote for this part. So quickly adding this detail over here. And getting our going to the further step of creating our client secret. So let me have the CC user. So currently we recommended is 6 months. We can always once say the client secret gets expired, there's also a way through which we can generate a new client secret and update it within our app service, which I'll be showcasing it once our Azure resources are being deployed. So let me just make a note of this client secret value also. Okay, so here we have basically created our company communicator app registration for user persona, that is for user bot. So that's over here. Now let me create one for my author bot. So let me create, I'm just following the same naming convention. As it is going to be registered with your Azure bot service, we have to select the multi-tenant accounts over here. And once we do this, again, noting down your client ID.
Hey, Jyoti,
And
quick question for you on the multi-tenant. I hope this isn't putting you on the spot. Sorry.
no, guys.
I had a question on the why we have folks select multi-tenant even if you're not in a multi-tenant environment.
Yes, that's a very valid question, and this is something that is there for your Azure bot service, because what we are doing is this is the app registration we have done, and we'll be associating it with our Azure bot service. And for Azure bot service, in order to work, it can only support the multi-tenant accounts. So that's the reason we would have to choose that. We have this also listed within frequently asked questions in the current GitHub as well. So why is it mandatory? Because when we deploy our Azure resources, our Azure bot services that would be created, it only supports the multi-tenant account types.
That's great to know. Real quick too, someone was asking, since we're creating it in Azure, does this mean you can use the app independently outside of Teams with messages still delivered in Teams?
Can you just come back again with that question? So creating app outside of Teams, as in outside of you're saying that you don't want it within this particular tenant, but in a different
not
tenant?
necessarily. You just go ahead.
I can clarify if you want. Yeah, cool. So yes, we currently build service apps within Azure, and they appear under my orgs apps in other parts of 365. Yeah, does this mean that someone can interact with the communicator content, if you like, to deliver the message? And then when the user logs into Teams, obviously they get the messages.
Okay, so Adam, as I understand, just a quick question over here is your Azure subscription is different, and your M365 tenant would also have your Azure AD, right?
Yeah.
So that's where you are registering your all the apps.
Yeah, I mean, it's just we see other Power Apps and other apps outside of Teams, and we can interact with them independently. So would the app we're spinning up here also work like that? I'm just thinking of if you're just wanting to not be in Teams but populating content, executing content.
Okay, yeah. I guess. Okay, so I guess what you're trying to understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Like for the Power Apps, you create it within a different tenant and then you import it. So this is what you want to say, that if say you're registering the app altogether in a different tenant, and still will you be able to use you can create an app and publish the app within the team store. So you would want to create those app registration into a different tenant, right?
Not quite. I don't want to store the installs, but yeah, it's more apps and Teams apps we see outside of Teams in the drop downs for for team members to use independently of the native applications.
Yeah,
it's cool. It'll come clear.
No worries. So Adam, just on that particular point, when you say outside of Teams, is it like outside of your current M365 tenant?
In the tenant, but in terms
in the
of
tenant, right?
Yeah, in terms of the apps under my orgs apps, you can see all the Power Apps and Teams apps.
So this is different from the Power Apps part, Adam. This is mainly on focusing on a way through which when we register these apps, this is just a way through which we will be authenticating our Azure application, our application that is installed on Azure.
That's cool. I understand.
So okay, so I can sync up with you offline if say for the further discussion on that, Adam, if you want. Yeah. So coming back to your MS demo, so as we were discussing about the app registration that is used for the authentication of our application that gets installed on Azure. So we have created one app for our user bot application, and the other one that we would be creating is for our authors. So we have created that. Let me see if I've created the client secret. So no, I've not created that. So let me just do that quickly. And let me just make a note of this client secret as well. So now we have these details wherein we have, as we will be having two bot registration channels, for one for author and one for user. We have our bot ID and bot secret for author as well as for our user as well. And we would have to note down the tenant ID. Now this tenant ID is important to note over here is because my M365 tenant itself is different from my Azure subscription. So within my Azure subscription, wherein all these Azure resources would be created, this is where I would have to update that this is the tenant ID from where this basically Azure application would be invoked. So let me start with the second step, that is deploying the Azure resources. So over here, so I've already already come to the second step wherein we can basically deploy through the ARM template. So there are two modes through which we can deploy, one through PowerShell script, one through ARM template. So I'm going with the ARM template form. So here, this is my Azure subscription, so which is not part of my current M365 tenant. It is altogether a different subscription. When we deploy our Azure resources, say if you have your existing resource group wherein you are installing all your app templates, you can use that. But I would recommend to create new resource groups so that you can, you can differentiate properly that this resource group is costing you this much on the monthly basis. So you can easily evaluate that what, particular app template is providing, what is the cost at the end of the month for this particular app. So let me create a new one over here. So say if it is, and this is for my, so this is the resource group that I've created. Now this is where we would have to check in terms of the region, because this is the region where all the Azure resources would be provisioned. So we need to ensure that this region has all the basic Azure resource services available in terms of your app service, storage account, your service bus, your Azure function, and your application insights. So uh, that's what you can select, and depending upon your region that is nearest to where your M365 services location is there, so accordingly you can select that. Now the base resource name, so this is the base resource name, this has to be unique, and you also have to ensure over here that once you basically enter your base resource name, which is say unique, and you don't run into the conflict issues, this is the resource name that would be used when you would be creating your this would be used for the creation of your Azure websites as well, on which your application would be installed. So, and also for your Azure front door, if you're not going to use your custom domains. Now coming to the point of your client ID and client secret, so this is where we have registered our apps. So let me just add those values. So again, going with the client secret for the user one. And let me go with the author one as well. Okay. Now, this is the part wherein we would have to make sure that our list of authors is ready with us, so we can always add these values, and only this users would have provision to compose your messages and send out your communication when you install that author app in one of the teams. Say going forward, if you want to add few more authors, you can always add it by visiting the configuration page of your app service.
I just want to
So
clarify that, Jyoti. I was about to ask you. So if you want to add people later, it's okay if you don't put them on now. You can always go back to the config page.
yes, you can
Cool.
always go back to the config page, and this is my already deployed app, so I'll just showcase you quickly on that part. And this is the configuration details that we have. And within the configuration details are we have our app settings. So say if you would also want to update your client secret going forward, or if you want to update this authorized creator UPNs, this is where you can always go ahead and update it and then restart your Azure app service. So yeah. So coming to the next part is for proactively installing user apps. So by default, that value is true. So as this company communicator solution, we have two apps, right? One is for user and one is for author. And user app is something that we would want for all users to have it installed so that they can get the communication. So if we have this proactive install user app true, what will happen is, say an author has composed a message and has selected the option to send out to all the users. For all the users, this app would be installed, so you don't have to, if you don't go via route of setting up the policies so that users can see this particular app, or so if you're not going via the route of Teams admin center app permission and app setup policies, is where this can be used just for the user communicator app. Also, one of the prerequisite of this is we need to make sure that our app is being uploaded into the Teams app store so that it can be installed for all the users. this user app external ID is something that we don't have to update. This is the ID for the user's app package that gets created. So here is the manifest for the user's app package, and you can see this is the app ID. So the reason why this is being used over here is so that for the proactive install, it can identify that particular app and get it installed for the users. Now, the default culture is ENUS, but these are the various cultures that have been supported. So say if you would want to install it in a specific culture, you can then select that. Coming to the, so these are the various supported cultures provided over here. Coming to the custom domain part, say if you have any custom domain, you can select that option. And once you go ahead with your deployment, after go ahead with the deployment, you would have to ensure that you link your custom domain with the Azure website, basically your Azure website that gets created over here. If you have a custom domain, it wouldn't have your Azure websites.net. You will have that custom domain being linked over here. So you have to associate your custom domain to your Azure website. And we have that, details even provided within FAQ, and also it is there within the GitHub also.
Jyoti, can I ask a quick question on that? There was a question earlier on the custom domain. This hopefully it makes sense to you. I'm a little lost, but it says, where in Company Communicator do you see the domain being used? Is it just on the back end, or does that make sense?
Yeah, so this is basically wherein we publish our endpoints and we want our app to communicate to that domain. So say currently if I'm using my Azure front door, and if I go to my resource group, let me go to my resource group HR. So this is one of my resource group in which the Company Communicator has already been installed. So here is where my Azure front door has been created, and this is the routing mechanism through which I would be redirected to my Azure website where the entire solution has been deployed. And what we need to make sure that when we have our Company Communicator app being deployed, they need to basically reach out to this accessible URL, right? So that our solution is being processed, is being running, and is being retrieved in form of our user interface in the Company Communicator app. So even when we create our, say, app packages, we do provide our domains, because this is where your app is being served to you within the context of team. So that's where we use this domains part, and that is where we are also specifying that this is the only valid domain that this particular app can get that data from.
So the end user doesn't actually see that domain?
No, end user wouldn't be able to see it because it is within the team's context, right, Hayden? So say if I go over here and this is my app that is already been installed. So this is the author app that has been installed, right? This is the interface that you see. So for the end users, they wouldn't be able to see that where exactly your request is going, right?
Okay.
So this is from where your app is being served, because that's where within that particular Azure website, your app has been deployed, and that's from that particular domain itself, your app has been served over here.
So we don't need to worry about it being a user-friendly domain.
No. So it is recommended to use custom domain, but if you don't have it, you can go via the route of your Azure front door as well. So that's totally fine. Does that sound good? Okay, Hayden?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, I guess Natasha also has a question. So say if you have custom domain, there is a separate configuration that once you deploy your app, you would have to associate that custom domain with your Azure website. And once you associate it, the places, suppose if it is, let me go to my, yeah, to this part. Say if you have selected your Azure front, say if you've selected your custom domain name over here, and once your Azure website gets created, so this is getting created, and if it is contoso.com, then it would be saved as say hrcontosocc.contoso.com would be your Azure website URL, and your domain would also be in that part. Your instead of azurefd.net, it would be your contoso.com would be your domain. So that's what you would also have to enter within your Teams app packages that you would be creating it. Okay, so let me go ahead with the deployment part. Okay, so once we either we go with the Azure front door or we go with the custom domain part, these are the few other aspects that we can update over here. So say if we want to have our app display name aligned to your organization guidelines, you can update that. Your app icon, say if you have any custom icon, you can always add this over here. Currently this would be fetched from the GitHub repo. And this is where the tenant ID needs to be updated. This is where, suppose your tenant is separate from your Azure subscription, and that's where you would have to enter your tenant ID, so that this is the tenant ID from where this app would be called out or would be invoked. So in terms of the hosting plans, this is the default values that we have for our app service plans. And coming to my location part, so this is as we have selected East US, we can always this would be referring to the East US plus only, because this is what we have selected when we want to provision our resource group. So, and this is the GitHub URL and the branch from where your solution would actually be deployed on your Azure website. So let me just review and create and start the process of provisioning this particular app template. So let me go this. So this will basically start the deployment process of creating all these Azure resources. And this is where you can monitor your deployment. Now, in interest of time, I already had my instance of Company Communicator already, the Azure resources already been deployed. So we'll just go over there and I'll just quickly walk you through the resources that gets created. So say this is the Company Communicator resource group that got created. You can always go over here within the deployment part and see the status of the deployment. Now, there are few aspects that we would always have to ensure that the output would generate. So one is your as your Azure front door would be provision, and Azure front door is basically your global and scalable entry point to route you towards your Azure website. So this is where your app domain details would have to be updated. Say if you use custom domain, then your custom domain would be over here. So it would be basically your base resource dot your custom domain. As over here, as we are using Azure front door, it is contosocc.azurefd.net. So we have to make note of this. Your author bot ID and client bot ID are user bot ID are nothing but those apps that we registered within our Azure AD. So we have to make note of this. And so this is where you would see the deployment part. Now, quickly going through all the resources that gets created. So the first aspect is the part of our app service. So this is our app service that gets created. So if let me just browse this one over here. And I can always go to the, so this is basically within this website is our React application. That is our tab interface and our bot application been installed. So a quick way to verify whether all the details, all our Company Communicator solution from the GitHub repo is installed on this Azure website is the way through which you can go to your Azure website. You can add SCM over here, and you can see that within www.root is where all your entire solution would be deployed. So you can see all the DLLs that have been compiled and have been pushed onto the Azure website, and this is where your entire code would be running and would be delivered to you or served to you within your team's context. So this is also one of the quick ways to verify whether the solution has been deployed or not. Now, coming back to So this is where my the deployment that I had started for one of the other for the current one is going on. And let me just let me go back to my resource group so that I can show you the rest of the resources that gets created. Yeah. So the other things that gets created over here is, as I was mentioning, we have two web app bots. So this is our Azure bot service or your bot registration channel that gets created. One is for your author and one is for your user. And if I just navigate to one of them over here, this is where you would note that, the app IDs that have been the app IDs that we register, the apps that we have registered, and the client IDs that we got would be updated over here. So this is where your endpoints get published. So this is where your Azure website is, where your entire application has been installed, and this is your messaging endpoint we come through which we can, from Teams, we can communicate. And this is our app ID when we create our app that we have registered for author or app that we have registered for user. So again, if let me just go to the user one also from here. Yeah, so you can see this is the different messaging endpoint specifically for the user. And again, this app ID would be that app ID that we basically registered within our Azure AD tenant for the particular user. Now, there is our service bus that gets provisioned. These are the function apps that would get provisioned. And this is basically our storage, our Azure storage. And this is where the storage tables would be created to store all our relevant information. Now, as we are proceeding, this is something that is going on. It takes around 20 to 30 minutes for your deployment to go. So in the meantime, as I've already deployed my solution, I will basically walk you through the part of what are the next steps that are there. So we have covered two steps as of now. We have created our apps. So I had already created beforehand as well two apps that we have now even deployed our Azure resources. So we have our Azure resources being deployed. And the third step is to set up the authentication for our app author app that we have registered. So one of the key things that we have to do over here is basically setting up the authentication, wherein we'll set up the redirect URI. Now, redirect URI is basically we are ensuring that our Microsoft Identity Platform redirects the client to the application to the application where your app is actually running. So that's where we would have to ensure that our redirect URI is in this format. So in the deployment guide, currently it just mentions that add a web, but you would have to proceed with this part of adding your platform, adding the web, and that's where you would give your redirect URI. So this is like from your teams, say if a user is using your application, user has been authenticated, and after authenticated, where you want the user to redirect, right? You would want to redirect it to the user to serve that interface, to serve that required data. So that's where we would have to enter this app domain that has been listed. Now here I've not used the custom domain, I've used my Azure FD. So that's why this is my app domain, and this is where we would have to add our redirect URI appended with the sign in hyphen simple hyphen n with our option of token as IT tokens that has to be selected. So this is one of the key authentication configuration that needs to be done. The other required configuration that is required to be done is exposing it as an API. Now what it does is when we expose this particular app as an API is we are authorizing the client application. So these client applications are nothing but this application ID is basically related to your team's web browser and your team's desktop client and your this particular client ID is related to your team's mobile app. So we are authorizing this client application to basically use our company communicator app, which has been deployed on this particular Azure website. So for authorizing that client, for providing that authorization is where we would want to expose it as an API. So again, we would have to make sure that we make note of our app domain, because this is where we would have to update our app domain, and would have to add our relevant scope over here that we are. So the scope name can be access as users. We want basically admin and users to consent this particular API. So basically we are exposing this API, and we are having that users would be able to access this API. So we are authorizing in a way this client application to use our company communicator app. So that's what this configuration is about. The other part is about the manifest. So the way, when we have our company communicator being added into the teams tab, or being set up as a bot. So whenever you add it, there is a request that will go to get the auth token. So say for the auth token, we want some other optional claim values. So that's where we add this particular optional claim value over here within this JSON, so that we can get the UPN details as well. So this is more related to all this additional information that we want to retrieve as form of our, authentication token. So these are the three main things that we need to ensure when our, app, when our Azure resources have been deployed. And once our Azure resources have been deployed, in terms of authentication, we need to make sure that the redirect URI has been set, our API has been exposed so that our authorized client application can consume it. And within the manifest, we add our optional claims details. The last part is to make sure that this app has relevant API permission. Now, why do we need all these API permission? Is because the company communicator solution basically provides us the option to send out the messages to M365 groups, to the security groups, to your DLs. So that's why we need this group dot read that read dot all option. It also provides us the option to select a specific team and send out the message into the general channel of the team. So that's why we need this delegate and application level permission for reading the groups, for reading the users. And these two permissions specifically, that is your app catalog and your team's app installation. Now these two are basically focused on getting your app installed for the user. So you remember, right, that we had seen that particular configuration of proactively install app. If that is set to true, we need our app to be there within the app store, so that that app can be read, can be retrieved, and then can be installed for that particular user. So this is where these permissions are required. So these are the four main configuration steps that are there. So currently, as you can see, the deployment is still in progress. And if I just go to my deployment guide, the things that we have covered is we have created our two Azure AD applications, one for author, one for user. We got our deployment started, and as I've already have the deployed version with me, so once the deployment is completed, we need to set up the authentication, so which is having our redirect URI being set up, having our API being exposed so that the authorized client application can consume it, and updating the manifest and the API permissions. So once this configuration has been done, then comes our last step of creating our Teams app packages. Now, say that here I have all my details updated. So say if I go to my Azure resources have been created, app registrations have been created, and now and all the authentication and API permissions has been created. I have already downloaded the GitHub version of the company communicator, and within that, I also have my manifest folder, and I have my manifest files for my author and for my user, manifest file for my user and author, because we need to create two separate app packages. We need to create one app package for the user and one app package for the author. Now, let me just show you in terms of the values that we would have to update. So what happens is, if you see in terms, there are three main aspects of the company communicator. One is that is deployed on your Azure, the application that is deployed on the Azure and using Azure resources. The second is the app registration within Azure AD that is used for the authentication purpose. And third is, how do you invoke or how do you call these services from your teams? So in order to invoke or call these services from the teams is where you will create your teams app packages. So when we create our teams app packages, teams don't host your application. Their teams packages will just have the definition of the app. So you would basically see what is the ID, what's the package name, what are the details in terms of, say, website privacy URL, website URL, or terms of usage URL that you would want to give. So say within your organization, if you're creating any of the custom app, if you already have your available privacy URLs or terms of use URLs, you would have to update it over here. Within the Teams app package, the other things is we would have to list down what are the icon details or what is the name and the description of the app, along with what is the capability of the app. Now, currently, the app that we have created for the authors, it would basically be used as a tab. You cannot add it as a personal app. So that's where the scope is set as team. Whereas for your users app, it can be added either into a team or as a personal app into the left rail of your teams. So that's where you would have to define the scope. So here, basically, for your authors app is intended for your authors to compose the message, compose the communication, and that's why the scope is specified as your teams. And there are a few things that we would have to update. One is what is the configuration URL from where we can basically get our our configuration details page when we add this particular app as a tab. So that's where we would have to add the configuration, our app domain over here. In order to ensure that this app will only interact to this particular domain is where we would add our valid domains over here. And as we have basically authenticated our app application, our author application, our application through the author app registrations is where we would have to enter our bot ID. So this bot ID is nothing but your basically your author client ID that would have been created when you have registered your author's app. So this is where you would have to update your bot IDs as well as your domains over here. Now, coming to your manifest.user, so that's the only difference over here is we would have to update the app that we had registered for the user. That's the client ID that we would have to update over here. Rest your domain would be same because your application would be served from the same Azure website. So once you have updated this manifest.json is where you would have to create your app packages. So here I've already created this app packages. The app packages should have your icons, that is your color.png or outline. Say if you would want to update it, you can always update that over here as well. And manifest.json. So each of your Teams package will basically consist of manifest.json that provides you the definition of the app and the icon. So as I've already created two of them, the next step over here is to upload it within our Teams admin center. So let me go to my Teams admin center over here. I know we are running out of time, guys.
Hey, Jyoti, I might actually call that out real quick. So how are you on time? Do you have to leave at the top of the hour?
I would need just 10 more minutes. Just I want to showcase the part of uploading.
I just meant if you're okay running through the hour is what I meant. Okay,
yes,
cool.
yes.
So apologies for those on here. We probably should have given more time. So if you want to stick around, please feel free. We'll obviously keep recording and then happy to stick around for questions after too, or if you want to post them in the chat. Sorry, Jyoti.
No worries, all good. So So as we have created our app packages over here now, so the first step would be uploading our apps. So let me just quickly upload our apps. So there's one author app and our user app, as we have been saying that there are two apps for two different personas. So let's just upload it within our app store and use our permission policies and set up policies to manage this app. Oh, okay, I guess I've already. Okay. Okay, let me see if it is already there. It seems I'd already uploaded it. That's why I was getting this option. Let me see if I have users app. Okay. So we have two apps already over here. So if I just go over here, this is where we can see, what is our app ID, what is our website and privacy URLs, and our publisher details. And say going forward, if you want to update this app, say if you have made some changes within the app package itself in terms of adding new app capability um, or adding a different icon, so you can always update that into the app package, update the version number and click on update status so that it gets updated. So that is from the management part of it. So now that we have these two apps already there within your app store, and most importantly, we need this particular app to be there within the app store so that if we have that proactive install option set to true, it can be installed by the company communicator solution itself. Now coming to the permission policies, I already had created a custom permission policy just for my author app because I only wanted set of users to have access to the author's app, but not all the users. So this is also one of the recommendation because you don't want author app to be used or consumed by the users, right? So you can always create a separate permission policy for those apps that is just required to be used by a set of users. So this is where I've added. And in terms of global policy, the global policy currently is basically, wait a minute. Okay. So the global policy currently has a block all apps, but ideally what it should be is allow specific apps and block the rest of them. So say if you have org-wide approved custom apps, now say my company communicator one, the user one is the approved one. So which I want all the users to use it so that they can get the comms notification. So that's where I'm giving that access for all the users to use this particular app in form of the global org-wide default. Now coming to the setup policies, what I have done is, and what can be done if you would want to manage these apps from your Slate Teams admin center is, you can directly pin this company communicator app also in the left rail so that it is easily noticeable, and you can also get the notification that a new communication has been arrived. So that's where you can also put it within the left rail path. So let me just put that users one specifically over here. So once this is done, the next step is we can always test it from our Teams client. So for that part, I already have my one of the apps, company communicator apps up and running. Now let's go with the author app. Say if I want to install author app on one of the teams, so let me search that. So I have my authors app over here, and as we were looking into our manifest also, right, authors app will always give you the option to just add it to the team. So this is in relation to this particular part that we have the scope defined only as teams over here. So coming to this part wherein say I want to add it to the specific team over here, let me add to remote support experts, and I can set this up. So when we are setting this up, and the configuration page that comes up over here, so this is where the configuration page would come up. So you can see this is the interface that is being served to us from that from that Azure website where the solution is being installed. So this is where we basically make sure that our config URL, our valid domain has been added. So yeah, clicking on save, and then we are good to go to start with the communication of our particular app. So say over here, if suppose here I'd mentioned that only these users are authorized users. Say if any unauthorized user is a member of a team, and if they try to access this app, they'll straight away get the message that they are not able to add any, they are not authorized to compose any message. Now once you basically have this option, so this is basically your task module component that is being deployed on your Azure app service. So this is what we basically this is the interface that we would get to, to compose our message. Now, in interest of time, let me do this, that I'll just, duplicate the option.
I was just say, Jyoti, we'll cover that one in great detail next week too. Keep going, but just so everybody knows, we're going to cover that one.
Okay, yeah. So say if I have I can always, when we compose our communication, we have this option to provide the title details. We can, as we have seen, we can always duplicate our existing message also. Say if we don't want to create it from the scratch, and as part of this this initiative, we'll also have our predefined templates as well. Our image URL, the only thing that we need to make sure that our image URL is publicly accessible. So you have to provide your image URL, and there are certain constraints in terms of the sizes of the image that we would want to put it over here. You can provide your summary details, your author details. So this is like mainly when you have your one instance of app and you want to send out communication from different department. So this comes really handy if you would want to send it out author as your HR department, or as your marketing department, or as your sales department. And you can specify your details over here. And coming to this option, wherein what are the various options that we have to send out your communication. So this is where all that API permission will come in place, so that we can see the details of these teams that are populated over here, and the messages can be sent out. Also, if we want to send out messages to the team members of the specific teams, so in 1:1 chat, we can use this option also, or if you want to send it out to all the users, or if you want to send it out in a chat to the members of your security group, your distribution group, or your M365 group. So say I can always select my M365 group and then send out the messages. Now say if I want to send it out to everyone, but now, so I can save it as a draft. And one of the other things that I wanted to show you over here is, as we have saved this as a draft, right? So if I go to my Azure portal, as I have multiple instances of Company Communicator and different instances of Company Communicator installed for the different tenants, wanted to show you that if we have composed the message, and what how are the things being stored at the Azure storage table level. So if you go to the notification data over here, as I had basically saved a draft notification over here. So you can see all these details in terms of the timestamp. Currently, I've set it that all the users will be receiving the notification. Who is the author? What is the button link, or by whom it has been created? If suppose we are sending the communication to the specific groups, we'll get the group IDs over here. So what has been the image detail? So you'll get all these details and the summary over here itself. And once it has been, say, if we send it, you'll get the details at sending notification. And once it has been finally been, delivered to all the recipients, you'll see it as a partition key updated as sent notification in this case. One of the other key things which I just wanted to show was say for the list of the teams wherein you would install this particular app, Company Communicator user app, will have all the details of that team provided over here. This is basically used when we compose our message and we get that drop down list, right? That these are the teams that we can send out our messages to. So this is used for that purpose. Similarly, all the references of all the users who have installed the app, be it a user or a author who has installed the user app, is where all these details are being stored. And we have the export data as well. So this is basically if we want to export the delivery report, is where we'll have the export data table being updated. So let me go back over here. So say currently it was in draft notification. If I send it, it will be in the sending notification. And once it's finally been delivered, it will be in the sent notification part. So currently you can see that it is syncing all the recipients, and then it is basically preparing to send out all the details. And yeah, so I can see that once it has been delivered, I'll get the notification in this manner. And yeah, so I can, as it has been still sending out the messages, I can then finally even export the details also. I can view the status and export the details also. So this is where when I export the detailed result is where you will see that export table within that Azure storage has been used. And once I export the details, I'll also get notification from the author bot. So you can see this is the author bot. So you can always distinguish. See, this is the user bot and this is the author bot. And that's where the communication is happening. And if we would want to download the delivery report, and if we allow it, it will be directly uploaded to our OneDrive, or it is also available for our download as well.
Could you make the tiles different colors to distinguish them?
You can always update the icons to distinguish that, Adam. Yeah, that's from the bot service itself you can do, and also from the Teams app package also you can do. Okay. So what I meant was, if I go over here, let me go over here. So this is our web app bot, right? So this is where there is a bot profile. So if you would want to upload a custom other icon, and if you would want to update a different display name, you can basically update it from there.
That's a really good idea, Adam. Are you thinking maybe for different types of messages you change the logo?
Just to distinguish it depends how many authors you've got. Yeah.
I might cite you in the FAQ if you don't mind.
Yeah, you can update it. And the second part is, again, when we have our Teams app packages where you can also upload the icon. So even within the Teams apps part also, it is easily identifiable. Yeah, it is easily identifiable if you would want to upload the icon over here. So yeah, so with that, we finished the deployment part. Apologies, I just ran over the time, but yeah, there were a lot of things to be covered, so that's why.
Yeah, Jyoti, that was my bad. I probably should have scheduled a little bit extra time. So thanks for the folks who have hung on. How are you looking on time? I mean, I'm happy to stick around and answer questions as we promised folks, and then happy to also, of course, always answer them in the team.
So I've got a question, sorry. The storage of all these posts and the image files, they're sitting in Azure. So would the Azure costs increase over time to store draft posts, real posts, or would we not store that data in SharePoint where we have lots of free storage available?
So currently image is this the image URL, Adam. It's not the actual image that we are storing.
Right, so it's quite light. All those draft posts being stored are quite lightweight. Okay, cool.
True. And if you see for the storage table itself, so you can see the current, there is the cost estimation provided over here. So how much it costs for at least just for 18 million operations or less than 6 GB of data. So you can see the cost is really marginal in that part. So even for the cost estimates, the main fixed component for the cost part is for your app service plan that we select, and the rest of the resources would basically give you the variable amount in terms of the usage, but it is very marginal, as we can see from here.
I might address this one out loud, Jyoti. I was just typing a message, but Bernard asked another great question on if you need to create a single company communicator or if you want to give different business functions the ability to use their own version. Look, what I will say is there's no real right or wrong approach to this, and so we did cover a few options in page 4 of the FAQ. But just to summarize, this would be my approach. Not that it's the right one, but if I was doing this in my organization, if we weren't planning on sending a huge amount of messages, I would probably just change the author and then the designated groups or security groups or Office 365 groups that we're sending the message to, so I can target users accordingly. But you can absolutely create multiple instances of the application if you want. One last thing I'll say too on that is we even added some code in there for a flow where if you've got a central team, so a comms team as an example, or a team even that sits within IT who manages which information is going to be sent out to which users, he created a flow and gave us the codes you can approve or reject some of these requests from your different authors, so to speak, around the business who can't directly author, but who are requesting to add a new message. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so Adam, just for the governance purpose, so yeah, you can create that flow. You can have that, flow in form of a logic app as part of the same resource group itself. So you have all your resources within Azure itself, which can take, with which you can, take the approval from the for the communication and then send out to the required recipients.
Awesome. So I might stop recording, but